This video, you guys are going to be able to identify used versus unused areas of supplier demand. This is literally the most requested video. And if you guys went to Alex's Lambo giveaway, this was like the most asked question that I was getting. So I figured I'd definitely do a video on this to help you guys out. So let's get right into it. So for example, by definition, our areas of supplier demand are the last previous contrary candle before a big push. Meaning, for example, you see this big bullish push right here that we have, the last contrary candle that's not touched. For example, the last previous contrary candle that's not touched would be this one right here, right? Notice how this is the last previous contrary candle before the push, but this one is touched here. Price pulls back into it and it is touched here. So this by definition is not our area of demand. Our area of demand would be this one right here, right? Our area of demand would be this area right here, this candle from wick to wick, and then you can see how price pulls back into this area and uses this area of demand. Now again, I say this area here because if we look, these areas here were already touched. So where was it touched? Price pulls back into it right here. You can see that this was created, price pulled back into it. This is not valid. So this is the candle that's not touched. Now ideally, this is how it's going to work. For example, you have an area of supply, right? Area of supply created something like this. What you want is for your previous contrary candle not to be touched. So you want something like this, right? You want something like, be something like this. And your supply would be at the previous contrary candle before the push. Now, we want this to be touched when price pulls back into it, right? When price pulls back into it, that's touched, and that's where we're going to get our entry from, when price pulls back into it. Now, this is the perfect scenario, like this one here, right? This is the perfect scenario where you see just volume coming in and it's not touched. But I have to teach you guys another scenario because there's questions that arise and this could definitely help you guys out. Now, notice this, right? Notice how this is the previous contrary candle before this big push here, right? But if you notice, it is touched right here. So let's break this down. So if we break this down right here, it's touched, but it is still valid. So I'm going to teach you guys why it is still valid. Now look at this, right? This previous contrary candle that gave us this push, it's touched by the next candle pulling into it, right? But it's the same color candle creating the volume pushing out of the area. It's the same color candle creating the area of demand. So for example, you see how it's the same, it's literally the same exact color candles creating the area. If this was a different color candle pulling back into this would not be valid. So for example, if price pulled back into this right after this, like we get a actual pullback into the zone, then it is not valid. But if your zone is created and you have a wick in your zone, it is still valid if it's the same color candles creating the push. You see how this is in the zone, but it's the volume creating the zone. It's not like, for example, this one here, like this here. It's not like this candle here because price actually pulled back into this, like this price pulled back into, and then we got this push. So this would not be the demand. The demand would be this one here, which price didn't use, but this is would by definition, this is demand here, not this here. Because you see how we have volume coming out. This is an actual pullback into the zone. So this right here is key. And then notice how this was valid, right? So let me just stretch this out. Notice this. We just mark that like that, and we take that out. Notice this, price ended up using this area to the exact pip. Notice how price pulled back into this area of demand that created this push, and you can see that price wicked this area perfectly, and then we got a reaction off of it, validating this. So this is a good question that I get from some of you guys, like what areas are valid versus what areas are not valid. So the key is if it's the same color candles creating the push coming out of it, if it's just a wick like being left after creating the volume, like that is fine. That is fine. What you don't want is price to pull back into the zone. So for example, this right here, like we wouldn't mark it like this because this is already touched, right? This, like this is not a valid zone to have pending because price already pulled back into this area. So for example, let's mark down the current areas that we could actually work with and what areas are used already, right? So if we just go right here on the 4 hour, we could identify very clearly that the areas that are not touched that are actually valid to mark would be this one here, right? This is this, and this is also another good example right here. So notice this H4 supply right here, right? This H4 supply right here, notice how it's the same color candles coming out validating the zone. This is a previous contrary candle before the push. Notice how this candle or the next one wicks into the zone, but it's just a wick. It's literally this candle closing and then the candle being formed here and volume coming out, creating the zone. Price is not pulled back into it. If price would have done this right here and we touched the zone like this, then we wouldn't be waiting for a reaction off the zone because it would be touched already. So you see how this here is, we have a wick in the zone, but it is not pulled back into, and that is the key. So this is valid here. This right here is another valid area of demand right here. So I'm just going to point out random areas right here. This H4 demand. Why is it valid? Because this is a previous contrary candle before the push, and price is not pulled back into this area. You see what I'm saying? There's no pullback into this area. It is clean. So an area that wouldn't be valid, an area that price already used, would be this one here, right? So we wouldn't be waiting for price to touch this one because this is a previous contrary candle before this push. You can see how price pulls back into the zone. If you have a pullback into the zone, then the zone has already been used. That is the key. Pull back into the zone is used. Now, when you have volume coming out, no pullback, that is when you can anticipate a reaction off that zone. So this is a valid area of supply. This is a valid area of demand. This is also, I'm just marking random areas. This right here, previous contrary candle. This one up here. Now, this is, again, guys, this one as well. Notice this right here. This one's a little bit trickier, but we're going to go over it again. This right here, I would still mark it because it's volume coming out. You see, it's volume. Price didn't pull back into it. Ideally, you want something like this, but in this scenario here, you still got to identify that this is volume coming out and the zone is still valid. Give me 1 second. Okay, so for example, let's break this down on the weekly. Let's get very detailed. So if we go to the weekly, right? Notice this right here, right? So notice the next weekly, or actually let's go to the daily because that's what we're working with here. So check this out. Notice the previous contrary candles that are not touched. When we get a reaction off of them, price uses them and then we continue to the next zone. So for example, notice this right here, right? This area of demand, of supply right here, this previous contrary candle that created this push, it was valid because price had not pulled back into it, right? Price touched it here and that's when we got the reaction off of it. This area here is not valid. We weren't expecting a reaction off of this area here over here. Why? Because price already pulled back into this zone and used it. You see this previous contrary candle before this push, price pulled back into it and used it. So this area is not an area we'd be anticipating a move off of, but this definitely is because you have the void and price never pulled back into it. Now, once price breaks past this area, by definition, we could look for the next area. On the daily would be this one right here. You see how it's not touched right here, this previous contrary candle before this push. This is not valid here. Why is this not valid? Because notice this, guys. This one has already been used, this area of supply right here, right? This previous contrary candle, this one, before this push, price already pulled back into it. Once you have a pullback into your zone and you get a reaction, that zone has already been used. So this one is used right here. Why? Because price pulled back into it. We used it. This area here is valid because price has not pulled back into it. You see this area here, we already pulled back into it. We used it. So by definition, we have no supply right here. This is just an area that's going to be used as a reaction. You'll probably get something like this. Something like this. And then price will continue to this area. We'll get a bigger reaction off this area here. Now notice this right here was just a pullback into an area of demand. If we go to H4, check this out. Because price is bullish. Price is just using these areas of supply coming from the left for a pullback into an area of demand to continue pushing price to the upside. So for example, notice this right here. This area of demand right here on H4 that created this push into the daily supply right here. Price used that daily supply to bring price right back into the demand that created the push. Now price is pushing up. So in reality, the next target for price is definitely up here, right? So pretty much right here, the key, guys, the key to identify what areas are used and what areas are not used is if your area has been pulled back into. That is what's going to be the key for you guys, identifying if your supply or demand is valid or if it is not valid. Now, let's just go over, for example, let's make it a little bit more, let's just go over what we got here, right? So if we look at gold, right? If we look at gold, what areas do I have marked and why am I anticipating these areas? So if we look at gold, for example, this area here is a valid area of demand because it created this push to the upside. When this is the main one right here, this area right here that created this push, but this is still an area of demand right here, the same color candles creating the push. So this is the first target for price, 1914. Once price breaks past this area, we'll fill this void right here to the downside and to the actual true area of demand that created the push. Now what we're working with is supply. So we have this area supply up here that created this push. Notice the previous contrary candle that's not touched. Notice how I'm not marking this one here. This one is valid here. Why? Because it's volume coming out. It is not pulled back into. This one right here, price already pulled back into and used it. So this is not valid right here, guys. This candle right here is not valid because price pulled back into it. This candle right here is valid because the push, no pullback into it. That's when you're anticipating the pullback into your zone and the reaction once it's valid. So I hope this video is useful for you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. Peace.